Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy EV miniseries. With me again is Niall Ridell. Neil, what are we going to be talking about in this episode?
So today we are going to talk about charging, which, let's be quite frank, is one of my favorite topics, but it's also really crucial because it's the big thing that changes when you switch to electric. You're no longer using a liquid fuel, you're using electricity. But we're going to talk about a very specific segment of the charging ecosystem. So I'd like to introduce Shayne Rees from Chargy, who's going to talk to us a bit more about how people charge at home overnight, particularly when they don't have a driveway. Hey Shayne, welcome to the show.
Hi Neil. Hi Chris. Great to be here.
So I've got a general question I always ask everyone, which is, who are you? How did you get here? What's your background? What can you tell us about your career path today?
Cool. Okay, so I'm Shayne. I'm a marketer who's landed up in the energy sector. I've been in the energy sector for a long time. So, despite these youthful good looks, I've got quite a lot of experience behind me. Started my career in tourism in Cape Town after studying marketing, and then moved to London, see the world, all that kind of stuff. And I was looking for a job in marketing, and it happened to be around the time that the UK's energy market was opening up to competition. So it was like 1998, and was lucky enough to fall into a marketing job in what was London Electricity at the time. That was a fantastic experience. Like breaking rules that had been established for years. That was really good, and it was an exciting time in the industry. So it felt like every year on the year for about 5-6 years, we had a major acquisition or a change of management team, and just loads of things were going on. And coming from South Africa, energy wasn't really the thing that I thought I'd end up being in, but it's been a fantastic career so far, and it's a topic that I find really interesting. So I think energy marketer is sort of how I describe myself these days. Ended up being at EDF for near on 20 years, and before getting into the charging game.
So what took you out of EDF? Because let's be honest, we were both at EDF. What took you from EDF into the world of EV charging?
Yeah, so obviously EV charging is really an energy story. It's I think it's less about cars, less about transport. It's really an interesting angle on energy and how that's used, and the role it plays in our push for a low carbon economy. I was one of the guys I was working with. So Dan Bentham, he ran EDF's R&D facilities in the UK. And he moved over to a company called Ubertricity. So EDF had a stake in Ubertricity. He moved over to run the UK division, which was really growing really fast because the UK market was probably at the time the fastest growing EV charging market in Europe, certainly for on-street charging. And Ubertricity was trying to make that market grow. So he sort of recruited me as his head of sales and marketing. And I was there for about 2 years. I left about a year after Ubertricity was bought by Shell, and joined Chargy, who do kind of the same thing.
And I guess for our listeners who, you and I know exactly what Ubertricity does, but for our listeners, who and what is Ubertricity, and how is Chargy different or similar to Ubertricity?
That's right. Yeah, good point. So Ubertricity and Chargy, we both convert street lights into on-street charge points. So think of it as upcycling or upgrading a significant power supply, which is sort of going unused, to help people charge their cars where they park. So in the UK, a lot of people don't have driveways, because we have lots of old cities, and which were designed before cars were around. So we all, lots of us park in the street. I'm a street parker. I don't have a driveway. I live in a 1930s house, and there happen to be lampposts in those streets. So why not convert them to charge points, so everyone can charge where they park and enjoy the benefits of home charging just without a driveway.
So are lampposts sufficient to do this as we're moving to like LED lighting and things like that? I would think lampposts are trying to reduce the draw on the grid. And so now we're bringing chargers out to the lamppost. Is that a kind of counter or contraindication to what's happening?
Not really. So it's a very good thing that we're using much more energy efficient street lighting, but that's not really where we get the extra capacity for charging cars. So I don't know if this is a quirk of the UK electricity system, or it exists more widely. But for some reason, lampposts in the UK have been given a far higher supply capacity than they ever needed for running streetlights. So most streetlights in the UK have wiring capable of running at 25 amps, which is about 5.5 kilowatts of power, which is more than enough for overnight charging or long dwell charging. And considering that most people park their cars outside their homes for long periods of time, at least as long as you're sleeping, that's more than enough capacity for lots of people to charge their car on a lamppost.
And is there network connectivity then along these lines? Are you putting fiber optic in or using radio connectivity to get back to the billing infrastructure and the rest of the charging infrastructure?
Yeah, so they're all IoT devices, and we use a 4G connection.
Cool.
So the genius at the beginning of Ubitricity was kind of weird, wasn't it? Because it started off with this simple socket, and the simple socket was a plug, nothing much more than that. And then the genius sat in the cable.
That's right.
But that transition has now moved, so everything is slid inside the lamppost, and you don't really see anything, and that's gone away. What happened on that journey? Why did they do that?
Yeah, so that was it's very very clever. So the idea behind Ubitricity was you take your electricity tariff with you. So your cable was the route that you'd unlock your electricity tariff, and the charge point was dumb. Unfortunately, what that created was a closed system. So you had to have a cable to use the charge point; it wouldn't work otherwise. And that sort of we had to open up the system in, I think it was 2018 or 2019, so that anyone with a standard Type 2 cable could use it. So the smarts that were in the cable, so it was like literally a box in the cable, halfway in the cable, which had a meter in it. Those went into the charge point, and the charge point ran like a normal smart charger, so that anyone could use it without requiring a contract to be a member of a service, which doesn't work with the charging regulations in the UK.
What kind
So
of
now
density
we're
do you get with these light poles? So is it entire neighborhoods you're trying to cover? Are you trying to cover a few spaces on a given block? What's the objective?
Yeah, so ultimately, we would like to have every lamppost with a charge point in it. So wherever you park next to a lamppost, that should be a charge point. In some places, Ubitricity and Chargy have charge pointed every lamppost in the street. So almost wherever you park, you can reach a charge point. When you think about how far apart lampposts are in urban areas, it's normally about 35 meters between the lampposts. That creates a great coverage, and very easy access to those charge points. So right now, as the number of EVs on the road is pretty low, so we're at sort of 2%, 3% maybe if you count all the plug-in hybrids, so cars with plugs. We're being a bit more cautious about how many charge points we put in each street. But we've got quite a lot of intelligence about where to install them today, and we have strategies to help councils make those decisions about where do you need them today, how many will you need in future, and what are the stepping stones along the way.
And there was this fabulous apocryphal story back in the beginning about the one, test lamppost that had a charger on it. So someone on the street saw it and bought an electric car, and someone else saw that the electric car was plugging into the lamppost. So a second car was purchased on the street, and then a third, and now you need more street chargers. Do you see that sort of cultural effect, that uptake of, oh, I can charge now, I'll get a car?
Yeah, massively. So this is about normalizing change. And that's sort of, is it keeping up with the Joneses, or is it seeing that someone else can do it, or I can do it too? It's all of that kind of stuff. I worked in worked in energy for a long time. I remember one of the guys that I spoke to years ago, when during the solar boom, and he said his priority is sell solar to one household in the street, and then the rest will follow. And it's the same thing with electric cars. The more you see them, the more normal they become, and then the more likely you are to choose an electric car for yourself. The charging, where charging plays a role in that, is in making living with that electric car easy. So I think electric cars are easier to live with when you can do all your everyday charging where you live, and that's the sort of the barrier that we're solving, or knocking down, or the benefit that we're unlocking.
So, having lived in cities, having tried to park in cities without having to worry about parking near a pole, just happy to find a space or on a snow day being on the right side of the street or the wrong side of the street, this sounds really cool conceptually. But if you're in a tight neighborhood with tight parking, and then maybe you have snow emergency times where you can't park, or a trash day or whatever where you can't park, how does this really work? How do I keep me from parking my car there because it's the only space available, or I plug in and charge and leave my car there? How is this
Yeah.
managed so that I could actually use my transport reliably and make sure that I have a charge every day? So that would be
Yeah.
my fly in the ointment from what I've heard so far.
Yeah. So you're right. If you don't have a driveway and you park in the street, you are not guaranteed to be able to park right outside your home or in the same place every single time. That's urban living. Us street parkers, yeah, we're cool people who deal with that. And so this is why we have different strategies for different types of locations, and parking. What I've learned is parking is a massively emotive issue. So when you look at some of the responses that people post back to their council when the council undertakes a consultation, people get really angry and emotive about their ability to park right outside their home. And so we help councils with different strategies to manage those kind of reactions and deployments in different types of places. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Um, it, Portsmouth is a city on the south coast in England. It's actually an island, and it's heavily congested. It's quite old. It's a naval town, loads and loads of terrace streets. So for the Americans, that's where the houses are all joined up. There's no gardens in between, no spaces in between. A very British way of living, and parking is a massive issue. It's a heavily congested area, and parking spaces outside your house, it's like finding hen's teeth. So that city council has a policy of always making the parking bay next to the charge point a dedicated space for charging. You have to be plugged in when you park there. Other places where parking is less congested, the streets are wider, the houses are slightly more spaced out, but they're all terraces or lack off-street parking. You don't have to dedicate the parking bays. Putting in more charge points is a way of providing that certainty of access to the charge point. And then there's a mix in between. So in some areas of a city, you might have very congested parking. In other areas, it's a bit more open. You don't necessarily need to do, all open or all dedicated. There can be a mix. So you might say you have half a dozen charge points in a street. You could say that 2 of those have dedicated parking, the rest are open. And not everyone has to charge every day. So, even a 3 kilowatt or a 5 kilowatt charge point can support 7 or 8 people with their everyday charging because most people only need to charge once a week, once a fortnight to cover their regular mileage.
And do you have a formula that folks use to figure out, hey, one charge point handles 10 cars, handles 3 cars? Is there some back of the napkin calculation you can share?
Yeah. So when you look at the number of miles that most people drive in the UK, we consider different driver profiles. So you get very light users. So a lot of disabled people who use their car for quality of life. Getting around in public transport is difficult. They're very low mileage drivers, and there's an organisation in the UK called Motability, which has a fleet of about 600,000 cars on the road. Not sure exactly how many of those park on the street versus park on their private driveway. But in the UK, councils will dedicate a parking space in the street outside your home if you're a disabled driver and apply for one. Sort of it's a right that you have. And where we see lampposts next to those parking bays, and working with the council, we're prioritising those because we know that Motability is pushing their customers to go electric. and this is where things start to join up. So when we're thinking about a driver like that, they might do 3, 4, 5,000 miles a year. That kind of driver, we can probably support 10, 12 of those drivers on a single 3 to 5 kilowatt lamppost charger. Whereas a taxi driver at the other end of the scale, they're probably the most high mileage drivers on average. They'll do 30 to 40,000 miles a year. They'll need to charge every day. So one charge point is enough to fully recharge their car overnight. But they need, that's a 1-to-1 ratio. And then there's a mix in between.
So you've just said the incredible number of 3 to 5 kilowatts.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a bunch of people out there going, what? I can't do anything with 3 to 5 kilowatts. Is 3 to 5 kilowatts enough to charge an electric car? What does that look like from a user perspective?
Okay, so I have a little saying: if you have lots of time, you don't need lots of power. If you don't have lots of time, you need lots of power, right? So that's the kind of the mix of charging. There's a balance to strike between the resilience of the local electricity network. So sometimes a lot of these wires have been in the ground for decades, and the distribution network companies who look after those and are concerned about network resilience, things not going pop, they sort of ask us to dial down the power to those charge points to about 3 kilowatts. They're very happy. That's a safe level. Nothing can go wrong, even if lots of those charge points are plugged in all at the same time. In other places, the wires are in better condition, and we run those as sort of high capacity as we can for the supply that's to that lamppost, and that's where we get sort of 5.3, 5.5 kilowatts out of that lamppost. So it's like from a network perspective, it's running the charge point, providing as much power as we can for the conditions in that location. For drivers, 3 kilowatts is fine for most of us, right? So, think about, you arrive home from work probably 6, 7 in the evening. If you're driving to work the next morning, you're probably going to leave somewhere between 6 or 7 or 8 in the morning. That gives you 10 to 12 hours easily to recharge your car. 3 kilowatts over 12 hours, that's what, 36. Yeah, my maths is right. Marketing guy, not the big brains that you've had on the show to date. That 36 kilowatt hours at sort of 3.5 to 4 miles per kilowatt hour. That's easily 120 miles a day. Most of us don't do that every day. So for most people, that's more than enough. And yeah, we're kind of very happy if we're getting one charge a day out of each of our charge points.
And you've now got hundreds, thousands?
Yeah, thousands. So we're by the time this goes out, we'll be well over 3,000 installed. Today we're at about 2,800.
Nice. So that would be high density deployments in specific towns and local authorities. So what's the journey like with the local authority, the partner, to get this stuff installed?
Yeah, so a lot of it. I think, like you just said, Chris, that 3 to 5 kilowatts. That's low power. Is it really going to work for us? There is a lot of skepticism. So in the UK, there is well over 10,000 lamppost chargers installed and working well. Providing a really good service. Not just Chargy, but Ubitricity has a whole lot, and there are a couple of other smaller networks. And but still, people are skeptical about this, so it's something new. We're used to years of running petrol and diesel cars and the way that they refuel. Lots of us think that, that's the way that electric cars need to be refueled as well. If you've lived with an electric car for more than a day, you'll realize, no, that's not the case. So we kind of have to prove the use case to some councils, and we do tests and trials with some councils. So we'll go and install a few. They get comfortable with the technology, how we install, all of that kind of stuff, and then they start to see how people use the charge points. I do a hell of a lot of talks to council saying, look, this is how people use them, and we try and share as much data as we can without giving away our secret sauce to our competitors, and eventually confidence builds, right? So I'll give an example. If in a network that we don't run, But the guys in Brighton and Hove, another coastal city on the south coast of England, um, lots of terrace houses. It's quite an old city, and they have a mix of charge points provided by the council. All of their lamppost chargers run at 3 kilowatts because that is the condition that the distribution network company has put on the cables in that city, and I think there's about 300 or so charge points of those charge points installed today. They publish all their data, so you can have a look at how much people are using the different types of chargers in their city. But yeah, you speak to the guys who run the transport team there, and the lamppost chargers are the most popular amongst residents because it's effortless. The charge points are where they live. This is the mountain coming to Muhammad stuff. It's location and convenience is kind of everything.
So I've used all of these solutions from all the different providers on the street charging solution. Can you just talk us through what it's like as a driver? How do you turn it on? How do what's the plug-in process? Is the cable connected? Does someone trip over it? What's that experience like as a driver? What's the etiquette for street charging?
Okay, so it would be nice if we were all considerate and left the parking bays next to a street light with a charge point on it open for someone to use that. My wish for public etiquette on EV charging is leave those spaces open if you're not charging. That's not always the reality of living in a city, right? When you plug in, there is some cable etiquette. Don't leave it lying all over the pavement. Just tuck it under your car or in the gutter, so it doesn't become a trip hazard. The charge points are right next to the curbside, so that we're always careful to make sure that where we position the charge point doesn't do that, doesn't create a trip hazard. So that, trailing cables is what everyone's concerned about, and the liabilities for that. But the experience of using a charge point is really simple. So we actually kind of grew out of a digital company that makes sort of web services. We have spent a lot of time optimizing our charging process from the consumer experience. We do a lot of demos in trade shows where there are hundreds or thousands of people walking around with mobile phones, and I'm always a little bit worried about we have a live charge point there, just connected to the standard 4G local network. Always concerned, is this going to perform as it should? And it's seamless and instant. You can start and stop a charge straight through our website. We actually started without an app because we were concerned that people had app phobia. But we launched an app beginning of the year because apps actually make things that you do often much easier. So most of our customers are high repeat users, so they'll use our charge point once a week, once a fortnight, daily if they're a high mileage driver. So yeah, doing things through an app actually makes that kind of stuff easier. And it's you can pay by Google Pay or Apple Pay. So very common ways of paying. We do that so that we can offer contactless payment without carrying all the costs of having to have physical card readers mounted on the charge points, which also creates an extra point of vulnerability. I think we've done a lot to optimize the charging experience, so it's super simple. You don't have to be a digital whiz kid to use one of our charge points.
So I'm still wondering, you talked about kind of a gray field build out, right? You're going to infrastructure that's in place. You're living with cables that have been in the ground or wires that have been in the ground for long periods of time. But as we transform going forward, what's the ideal that you want to build to? So you talked about what works, but what's the future look like? What kind of speeds are we going to get for charging? Because as everybody has an EV, or if you stop making internal combustion engines at some point, a number of charge points may not be enough from the light pole. So where does this go? Does it just get more faster charging? Are there more connections in a block, or how does this evolve? And does it turn into the same thing like where we have scooters in every corner, right? Where there's chargers everywhere, so the city becomes untenable for people, like they did with those electric scooter things.
Yeah, so fortunately, charge points don't move. They stuck on the charge point. They're not going to jump out at you. I think what we're trying to do is create a network of low power chargers, which makes access to the electricity that you need really easy. And I think there's, this is when we start thinking about the wider system effects of the type of charging infrastructure that we're installing. So, you had Graham Cooper on a couple of episodes ago, and he was talking about the role that EVs have in the decarbonisation of our electricity system. And one of the things he spoke about was, when a car is plugged in, is how often is the car plugged in, right? So the engineers think, oh, there's this much charging capacity or storage capacity, and that's how much capacity those EVs can lend to the grid for flexible demand and energy storage. But people don't plug in all the time. You plug in when you need to charge. So EVs are kind of an asset to a more flexible, more renewable friendly energy grid when they're plugged in. They are not an asset when they're just standing alone. So the more we can encourage people to plug in for long periods, the more that those cars become an asset for our low carbon future. And even on very low power charge points, people aren't plugged in. They're not charging for the full duration of their plug-in time. So we've got a bit of flexibility there to provide some flexibility services back to the grid. And I think that kind of system-wide thinking is really what's going to help amplify the benefits of electric vehicles to not only decarbonising transport and reducing pollution from transport, but accelerating the decarbonisation at a much cheaper price of our electricity system.
This is very cool because you're not the first person to talk about integrating cars into the electricity grid. We had a speaker from STEM previously, a speaker from Hitachi previously, both of whom talked about the role of electric vehicles plugged into the grid as energy assets in the distributed energy system.
Yeah.
Have you done any trials on how to really get flex? I believe you've got a time of use tariff now. Why do you have that? How does that work? What are the things you're doing in this space?
Yeah. So we've got a couple of experiences. So when I was at Ubertricity, we took part in an innovation project called Vehicle to Streets, and that was looking at V2G through low power charge points. So we had a specially modified Honda Civic, which had a massively expensive inverter in the boot, and we were doing V2G sessions through one of our standard lamppost chargers using the smart cable with that sort of meter in the middle of the box, in the middle of the cable, to as a controller for starting and stopping the charging. So that was pretty cool. So it can be done on standard low power charge points. You just need the vehicle to be able to do that, and some sort of system controlling it. So at the moment, most cars can't do V2G, but that's not where most of the benefit is. Just by scheduling the charging, so managing when the energy flows into the car, you can unlock like 80-90% of demand flexibility to benefit both the driver in cheaper prices and the electricity system through sort of demand shifting. So we mentioned day-night pricing. So we introduced that in December last year. Electricity prices went absolutely nuts last year, and this was our response to managing that for our customers. So most of our customers plug in the evening. So we looked at the profile of when our customers start their charge and end their charge, and quickly came to realize that day-night pricing would work for the vast majority of our customers. Not all, but the vast majority. And because electricity prices were just so nuts, we sort of went for a day-night price, which is what most people who get an EV and charge at home do. You'll switch to an EV tariff where you pay a bit more for your day price and a lot less for your night price. And the electricity system works that way because demand is normally so much lower overnight. It's like a third off the sort of peak demand during the day. And drivers have responded to that in their droves. So before we changed our pricing structure, about 30% of the electricity that flowed into the cars occurred between midnight and 7 a.m., which is our night saver period, that's now doubled. It's nearly 60%. And all of that demand has sort of shifted out of the early evening. So drivers are very price sensitive, and we did some research before we, with our drivers before we launched it, and asked, do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea, and why? And a lot of people who thought it was a good idea said, because this is how I charge normally, and I'll be able to access cheaper prices. But I was surprised, and this was unprompted, by how many people said, actually, this is good for the grid, and this is good for working with renewables and that kind of stuff. Only one person said this is good for the environment, but people were quite a lot more grid savvy than I thought they would be.
So you bring up a topic that comes to mind when I'm hearing this. Is, do you show provenance of the electrons, where they come from? How do I know if I go to one of your charge points, because I'm just plugging into a grid, that I'm getting, I bought a green vehicle, perhaps because I want to do something green, and
Yep.
I plug into the inefficient old grid with those 20-year-old wires in the ground. What do you do to help me control that I'm getting some green power for my green vehicle?
Okay, so we're doing two things. So one, we have a renewable-backed electricity supply. So we've said to our electricity supplier, please source all our electricity from renewable sources. The other, but that's important, but it doesn't really move the needle. How we're really moving the needle is by encouraging people to use more electricity when demand is low and the carbon intensity of the electricity system is low. So it varies massively through the day, like massively, and it varies from day to day. Today we're sort of working on average profiles. So generally speaking, the grid is the least carbon intense in the wee hours of the morning. In summer, it's also very low carbon intensity in the middle of the day. But that's a problem we're going to have to solve next year, maybe, and sort of think about how we restructure our prices to reflect that. But yeah, we're doing a lot to move as much electricity demand as we can outside of the evening peak, which is when you have a lot of gas-fired power stations on the grid and sort of local backup generation, trying to supply as much energy as we can to meet sort of the typical evening peak. It's the dirtiest time to recharge. It also happens to be when lots of people return home from their commute, and the first thing they'll do is plug in. So yeah.
So Shayne, what does like an average charging session look like for a driver?
So we get a really wide range of charging events. So I was looking before we had the call about what's the biggest charge we've had in June. That was 91 kilowatt hours. But most charging events, so about 3/4 of our charging events, are under 35 kilowatt hours. So when this is one of the things we have to explain to the councils that we're working with, is about how people charge electric cars in everyday life. And unlike a petrol or diesel car where you might run it all the way down to reserve before you go to the petrol station, because going to the petrol station is a faff. You tend to keep your electric car sort of somewhere between 20-30% full and sort of 80-90% full. So 35 kilowatt hours is like half a Tesla Model 3 battery. It's the amount of energy that you can get into your car in the 7 hours of cheaper charging that we offer. But this was kind of the norm before we changed our prices. So even on our old single rate pricing, most people, that 3/4 has of our charging events under 35 kilowatt hours has remained pretty constant. Before we had when we had a single rate price, and now when we got a 2-rate day-night price.
That's pretty cool. The bit I'm really interested in is that 91 kilowatt hours. What the hell puts 91 kilowatt hours into its battery? That's a big battery.
Some massive.
It's one of the big Teslas, isn't it?
Yeah. There's a few cars coming out with massive batteries. I think the Fisker has like a 110, 112 kilowatt hour battery. I think that's largely because it's such an inefficient car. So it also comes out with solar panels on the roof. So so I saw a guy at Fully Charged Live, and they had one of those on display, and he was like, that will get you 2,000 free miles every year. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. Read more about the car, and it's not the most efficient thing on the road.
Well, cool.
The
So,
only other really big one I can think of is the Mercedes EQS. That's 108.
Yeah.
well, don't the electric Humvees, the H2s or whatever, they must have huge batteries and stuff, the big SUVs.
Most of them are, I think the batteries tend to top out around 80, 90 kilowatt hours. There's a few outliers with more than 100 kilowatt hours. Because batteries are expensive.
So
The internet says 212 kilowatt hours in a Hummer.
yeah, because the H2 is GM makes it, or whoever the Chinese company bought it made it electric, right? I think, but so it came back, but it's pretty big and heavy vehicle. It's a pretty heavy truck. So,
Yeah.
switching gears a bit. So I take what you say at face value. I wish it was a greener answer because I think that would make people happier to go faster. But the reality is we are where we are, so it is what it is. We talked in our last interview with a guest about wireless coming down the pipe. So, because I picture a street with all these wires, even if they're neatly tucked to the curb or put out of the way, I have a charging cable I have to worry about and things like that, or perhaps someone could mess with my cable. It'd be sure cool if I could just pull up and wirelessly charge. So, where are we, and how far is that from today?
So it's coming along. We did a trial last year with wireless charging and how that would work for car clubs. So car clubs are interesting. I think for most people, charging with a cable is fine, right? It's very simple. It takes 2 ticks, and it's a very simple and cheap technology. One of the issues with wireless charging is the vehicle. It's just like vehicle to grid. The vehicle needs to be able to support it. So in our case, with the no vehicles come out with that as standard. In our case, we converted a bunch of Renault Zoes which was good for car clubs, good for short term use, and we had to do quite a lot to make those Zoes recognize that they were getting electricity from a charging pad that we fitted underneath the car, and make it think that it didn't know the difference between whether the energy was coming from there or through the standard car port, charging port. It's I think right now it's a very expensive way to charge your car, not because of inefficiencies. So the efficiencies were not wildly dissimilar to charging through a cable, but because you have to do so much retrofitting to the car, and the pads themselves are expensive. Fitting those is quite expensive. But I think that's a technology which in a few years' time might be more popular, certainly for niche applications like car clubs. So what we were solving there was electric cars sound great as car clubs, but they're a nightmare for those car club operators to keep charged. So unlike petrol and diesel car club cars, you can't just leave a fuel payment card in the glove box and expect your driver to go and refuel it. That's how most car club cars are refueled today. And what some of the car club operators have told us is anything you don't have nailed down gets stolen, and a charging cable is a fairly expensive piece of kit. So the way that some of those car club operators keep their cars charged so that people find them a useful service is they'll send someone out to go and pick them up when the battery is low, take it to a charge point, wait for it to charge, and then go put it back and get the next one. And that's massively resource intensive. So there, an expensive retrofit to a car club car so that you can have the car hirer just return it to base and park it over the charging pad. That's another issue. Is a good way to solve that problem.
All right, and just to be clear, a car club is a shared car resource, right? That's what you mean by a car club, not a bunch of people souping up cars for fun.
No, yeah.
It's a shared economy kind of car where I don't have a whole car and I just have use of a car.
That's right, yeah. And you'll hire it for a couple of hours or a full day, or one quick journey.
Cool. I have a question about internationalization, because we are both sat here in the UK at the moment, Shayne, and we've got a bunch of listeners who aren't here in the UK. Here in the UK, we have a relatively unique problem. We've got about 40% of people who can't access a private driveway. You can probably see parallels in places like maybe France and Germany and some of these other compact European cities.
Yep.
Does this technology translate to the US, to North America, to other countries?
Yeah, yeah. So we actually have a trial going on at the moment in New York. So that's our furthest charge point. We've got a couple installed in Ireland as well, and we're looking to expand there. But yeah, there's street parking, wherever street parking is normal, then charge points on street are going to be required. And often the most convenient way to get that charge point in is via a lamppost.
And do I pay the same kind of rates, or do people use the charge point in the street to kind of balance out? So if, let's say I'm a high mileage driver, I might want to go for faster charging just for convenience, but do they use the charge point to kind of cost average down? Is that part of what people try to figure out?
So I think like any service, you get people who are highly price sensitive and people who don't care. They just want it to. They just don't want it. They want it to work, and people who want a mix of value and convenience. When you look at the range of charging prices that you could pay, compared to if you charge at home on an EV tariff with your home electricity supply, that's super cheap. And at the moment in the UK, it's like 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour. Let's say that's cents for the American audience. Um, on a rapid charger, the average price of charging there is 75p or 75 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's like a 10 times difference. And then you have AC charge points, which tend to be somewhere in the middle. And so I gave a talk on this quite recently, trying to explain this massively wide range of prices that you could pay to put the same electricity into your car, and how wildly different that is to our experience of driving petrol and diesel cars. So there is some price difference between brands, so whether you fill up at a supermarket petrol station or a branded petrol station or a motorway petrol station, there are some price differences, but nothing like 10 times. And yeah, so when you consider that, and then the kind of the convenience factor, um, yeah, we're weighing up a bunch of different things, and I think our challenge as a charge point operator is to try and explain how, if you don't have your own driveway and your own charge point, then what's the best way that we can give you really good value, but also earn enough to keep our charge points maintained and keep them upgraded, so that we're continuing investing in the service that you rely on.
I get the business model. I guess the things that come to mind is someone in the professional world is, for example, in the U.S., there's a IRS gives you a rate when you drive the car per mile, right? So if there's a variable of 10 times different, and you get paid per mile because you're driving and you expense those mileage in, and the company pays you what the government allows them to pay you.
That's right.
How do you calculate the difference between what you actually paid, the 7 cents or the 70 pence or whatever it was? Because that seems like a pretty big variable. If you multiply that by a fleet of, let's say you have a sales team of a couple hundred people or something like that, that's significant money on the back end.
Yeah, so this is not my specialist subject. This is where Neil knows a hell of a lot more than I do. So I might have to get him to answer that. But I think the cheaper we can help people do most of their charging, then the fairer that works out for everyone. If you're only relying on the most expensive form of charging, because that's all that's near you, then yeah, running an electric car is an expensive proposition. So we need to give people, whether they are driving for their own purposes or as business drivers, access to lower cost charging, because that's what's going to get more people into electric cars.
We see exactly this. We get fleet customers approach us and they go, I want lots of rapid chargers. And we go, okay, we'll get lots of rapid chargers for you. And of course, the mentality that's going through their head is, I want something like a petrol station. So quite quickly, they send all their drivers off to petrol stations. They go, hang on, this guy's spending 45 minutes during the day charging. Surely we can come up with something else. And we go, yeah, well, we've got these other things called slow chargers. And they go, where are they? And they go, well, there's a couple around the streets around about you. Well, I'll tell my drivers to go and charge there. And quite quickly, you go through this, technical change into a behavioral change. And it's that behavioral change pattern that's quite hard to implement in a business environment. So, encouraging, fleets and businesses to think slightly differently, or encouraging drivers to think differently is really crucial in this transition.
And
Yeah.
so the other thing you mentioned is you have apps and you can pay through Apple Pay or Google Pay or things like that. Is that a hindrance for people? Is everybody set up to handle that today? So is everybody at that point? I mean, I know when I go on the trains in the UK and the buses, I pay with my phone. I don't use money ever. So is that pretty universal across the UK that everyone has a smartphone these days to be able to get their car places?
I'm not sure the exact percentage of smartphone adoption, but it's really high. There's another issue of like digital exclusion. So there are people who just struggle with digital services, and they're we're going to have to find a way of helping them. But they are today unlikely to be early adopters of electric cars. So I think that's a problem we can solve at a later date. And the way technology adoption happens is it eventually arrives for virtually everyone. So I think it's a problem that will solve itself. So today we're very used to paying with contactless cards. We are, but that didn't used to be the norm. So I remember, how long ago was that? Not too long ago. One of the card operators, I can't remember which one, maybe it was Mastercard, did a big campaign about cashless payments, and that was trying to shift people away from old style money into using contactless payments and getting over. I don't have to enter my PIN number anymore. And then we moved to doing it by phone through Apple and Google Pay. In a few years' time, not in the not too distant future, we actually already have this technology available in our charge points. We haven't turned it on yet. Your car will be able to pay for the charging itself without you getting involved. So plug and charge or auto charge standards, those are really close to being deployed and will make charging easy and payment super easy for everyone.
This is wicked to hear. You've taken us on quite a journey, and I'm conscious that normally what I do at this point in the show is I wrap up and I go through the things you talked about. But I'm also really conscious that there's plenty of people out there who don't believe in street charging. So do you have like a one-line pithy statement that you provide customers that goes, this is why street charging is an important part of the EV charging ecosystem?
Yeah. You have to make charging super convenient for everyone to make the switch. So I have a slogan of hyperlocal. Let's put the charge points where the cars are. And that's what will make charging and running electric cars very easy for everyone. It's also the way we're going to unlock all those extra carbon benefits and energy system benefits of that electric vehicles have to offer. And it's going to make this whole transition towards a net zero future, which is so urgent, much cheaper for everyone. We'll be using more renewable energy, which is super cheap. We pay a lot today as a country for turning off wind farms when there's too much wind in the wrong places, and that's a problem we can solve by adjusting when we charge our cars. But to do that, the cars need to be plugged in for long periods.
So hyperlocal, that's the answer. Get it everywhere. Now we've talked a lot about the business and your professional perspectives, but personally, what do you drive as an electric car?
So I've got a Tesla Model 3. It is an amazing car. It's like so fast. I do quite a lot of miles. So last year I did about 24,000 miles. That's quite a lot for the UK. In the UK, you can't drive too far without hitting a traffic jam. So you probably count your journeys more in hours than you do in miles. But yeah, it's an amazing car. It makes sitting in traffic really comfortable. That's that's an important benefit for an electric car in England.
Well, I think it's been an amazing conversation. I want to thank you for sharing insight on the street parking. I think we've talked about that quite a bit, both Neil and I. Living in Europe, I'm in Switzerland right now, but even when I go back to DC in a couple of weeks, we have tight street parking in DC as well. It's not uniquely a European problem. And it was interesting to get your perspective on that. Thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast today.
No, thanks so much for having me, Chris.
For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we have making it. If you have questions, drop them into the chat. Our guests will see them and you'll get responses. Follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, and we're going to see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy EV miniseries. Goodbye for now.